Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Paul Jowdas, and I am the chapter leader for Americans for Prosperity, Marion County. And before we get started tonight, I just want to say welcome, and once again, thank you for coming. It's going to be an important evening. Tonight's debate will continue next Friday at the Salem 912 meeting at the Scottish Rite Center on South Commercial. So if you don't get enough tonight, even if you do get enough tonight, go ahead and go next Friday. Our next AFP meeting is October 23rd, just for anybody who wants to put that on your calendar. And just a reminder, and one reason why you're here is November is coming. Now's the time to get educated and to become knowledgeable about the candidates and the issues for our upcoming election in November. Get smart, get right, and vote knowledgeable. And most importantly, get out and vote. So, without further ado, I'm going to bring up Ted Campbell. He's our Polk County chapter leader for Americans for Prosperity, and he's going to be running the show tonight. And we're going to start off with the Pledge of Allegiance. So,
please stand. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Can everybody hear me? Okay, there's a few rules that we want to go over real quick. One is the questions will be asked by myself. They've been sent in for the last month, and we've got them on cards. I've shuffled them and flopped them around the envelope. I don't know what order they're coming out in, but they're coming out. And those that don't will go to mail for next week's. And if you have questions you want to ask that weren't asked tonight or you didn't send in, please write them down and give them to mail tonight for the 912 part of the debate. And there's no arguing with the candidates. And the candidates aren't going to argue back and forth with each other or throw watermelons at each other or anything. We're going to get a debate going. They have 3 minutes to talk. We tossed a coin, and Mr. Evans is going to go first, followed by Kathy Goss. And whoever goes first has 1 minute after to rebuttal, and then we'll swap places and continue on with the next question. Everybody understand that? Okay. Anybody have any questions before we start? Well, then I'd like to introduce our debaters for tonight. First, we have Kathy Goss, and a lot of you know Kathy. She's been around. She worked up at the Detroit School District and several of the schools around there. She worked for Moe's Restaurant, supervising Moe's Restaurant and Clam Chowder. You didn't bring it tonight, did you?
I did, but I ate it before I got.
All right. And I'm going to be real brief with these introductions, all right? Because we want to get to the questions. And she has a business, I believe, with your husband, right? Here in town. So she's a local lady who's worked a long time and has done a lot of different things and knows a lot about different things. I won't say she knows everything about everything because that's not true. Okay? And in this corner, we have Paul Evans. Paul was born in this area. He was the youngest person up until a few years ago elected to office as the city councilman in Monmouth. And then he became mayor later on. He worked at the university, well, I want to say Willamette, but Western University. And he was deployed also. He was at 4 years in the Air Force. He was deployed in the Air National Guard. And ran Monmouth from Iraq, which is a real hard job. So then he came back, worked in the fire department, and taught, and now he's running for this position. So we have two fine candidates tonight, and as soon as I get down there, we'll start with our questions. By the way, once the questions are asked and I put it down to your 3 minutes start, let's start while I'm gathering. Okay, Paul, what is your stand on the issue of making recreational marijuana legal in Oregon?
We'll start with an easy one, I guess.
Yeah.
All right. Before I actually answer that, the answer is going to be I have a mixed opinion about it that I'll explain. I want to actually say thanks to all the vets in the room. We get the opportunity to be here and do these things because of folks that are out there and have been out there, and we still have folks deployed, so hopefully they're on our minds tonight. The question at hand is where I am on the ballot measure for marijuana. I am evidently one of the few of my generation who have never tried marijuana, so I have no dog in this particular fight. However, I think two things. Number one, I think it's going to pass, and number two, I think that the measure will likely clarify what can only be described politely as a messy medical marijuana piece of legislation that we have right now. I think the revenue is going to be helpful, and at the end of the day, I think the people are going to pass it. So that's where I'm at on that issue.
Sure. I think you'll find out that I'm clear, I'm decisive, I'm not an orator, I'm a straight shooter. I'm against it. I'm against it being legal in Oregon. We have enough problems with alcohol and other addictive substances. I see no reason to add another one. We have 2 other states that are trying it. Let's wait and see what happens there. Thank you.
Okay. All
Do I
right.
need to rebut?
Rebuttal?
No.
No rebuttal. Okay. Kathy, this one starts with you. Would you support or propose a bill to change the food stamp program to limit food purchases to non-prepared food and require all beverage deposits to be paid out of pocket?
Well, that seems to me to be chiseling around the edge of a bill of what we provide for citizens that can't take care of themselves. Frankly, I go right back to the business point of view. We need more jobs. If we get more jobs, then we'll have less people on food stamps, and we can afford to do it. Right now, with no economy in Salem and my District 20, I wouldn't consider that.
Paul?
Well, unless a lot has changed, most of the regulations having to do with food stamps, I believe, are federal legislation and federal regulations. But I absolutely happen to agree that at the end of the day, we can try to find ways to make welfare more fair. We can try to find ways to make it more helpful. But the root problem we have is we have an economy that needs to be accelerated. We have work and skills that need to be provided to workers. And we need to find a way to be more competitive globally. So one of the reasons I'm running as a small business person also is trying to help sell Oregon goods overseas. We have to get more jobs, we have to get workforce training, and we have to have a systemic approach to trying to prepare people for the 21st century.
Kathy, rebuttal?
Sure, I'll have a rebuttal. So what happens when we decide we're going to clamp down on what people have in their grocery cart? Is that really the role of government? Come on, I don't want to pay for policemen to stand at every checkout counter and look what's in your cart and what's in mine. If people are truly needy, I don't want to examine what they're buying. So I absolutely would not agree.
Okay, Paul, this one starts with you. They say I should use this. Would you support or propose a bill to require community colleges to provide trade school training for welfare recipients at no extra cost to the taxpayer or student?
I'm a little bit uncertain how that could happen, but here's where I am on education workforce training. I actually teach full-time at Chemeketa Community College, and we have a number of programs that are linked into a number of federal programs that would be considered under the welfare umbrella that are currently trying to provide skills for folks to get them back in the workforce. The largest issue, I think, that the questioner is trying to get to is how you take folks that have been long-term unemployed and how you get them back in the system. And that requires, I think, looking at what we are currently incentivizing, how we're doing it, how we're training, and ultimately trying to use what's going on in the employment department, because they're undergoing a lot of changes right now. How we can actually leverage some of the Trade Act funds and other funds available through Department of Labor to get at that point, to be able to provide skills that are applicable to the 21st century. What we don't want to do is we don't want to make more burdens on public entities already for costs that we don't know how we're going to pay for skills that may or may not be relevant to the 21st century workforce. We have done that before, and we have to watch from doing that again.
I'm frankly not in favor of free training. If someone doesn't have any skin in the game, that's not to do memorable training work. People have to have skin in the game. And I think we have lots of public service jobs that people could get to earn the right to attend Shemeketa or a training course.
You have a rebuttal to that?
Just that there's not so many public service jobs as there used to be. And in terms of police at the line making sure about the carts, Polk County doesn't have that problem anymore because we don't have many police officers.
Okay. All right, Kathy, we'll start with you. If the federal government has an agency and the state has the same agency, would you work to eliminate the duplicity or duplication? Examples, Department of Agriculture or DEQ and EPA?
First of all, I think we have too much intrusion of the federal and the state government into local enterprise. Farmers know how to farm, let's let them farm. And that's my position. However, as far as there are federal rules and regulations, I just as soon they come in and enforce their own and don't lay it on the state with no money to pay for it. I would just as soon leave the state taking care of their regulations.
If I understand the question, it's in those situations where there's a Fed and a state entity, and they have some overlapping responsibilities. How would we try to find ways to be better stewards of the public's purse? Is that what you're looking at? All right. This is where a situation, actually, because I worked for Governor Kuligoski for 3 years, I actually did these kinds of things in the military department, especially around veterans policy. There are ways to leverage federal requirements with state need and, oh, by the way, local concerns. One of the advantages of being a former mayor and a former school board member is that if I get elected to the state legislature, I don't think that every solution, by the way, is government, and I certainly don't think that every government solution is state. There's a way to work together to leverage available resources to find a better sum than the parts.
I don't think we did so well with our veterans in this state. And since you brought that up, I'll mention it. I think we need to do a whole lot better in improving our veterans services, and we need to provide vets with what we promised to do in health care, in wait times to get in. We need to take care of that. It's already been promised. We need to deliver.
Okay. Kathy, the next one goes to you. ODOT, or Oregon Department of Transportation, has over 5,000 employees, and much of the work as paving roads and building bridges is outsourced. Would you look into and support reducing the number of ODOT employees?
Yes, I would. I'd reduce the employees, and I'd reduce the amount of bicycle lanes, and I would reduce the amount of trails we're taking care of, and all the other things that ODOT has chosen to do rather than just take care of our roads. State of Oregon's still in a recession. We don't need the fringe things right now, and we don't need the public employees to do them. I'd like to cut the amount of employees down and stick to the basic things that are outlined for government to do.
I'm sorry, I got that out of order. Go ahead.
All right, the question has to do with ODOT, but before I get to ODOT, I just want to emphasize, you're absolutely right on the veterans issues. That has mostly to do with the veterans healthcare system, which actually isn't a state function. And in 2009, we had a great package, but then along came a recession, and we cut a lot of the services. I'm looking forward to trying to restore those. Now on ODOT, let's actually talk about ODOT for a moment. It is interesting to me that in the wake of the Oracle debacle, we're talking about potentially outsourcing more. Now, government made a lot of mistakes with the Cover Oregon thing. I'd like to make sure everybody understands I wasn't there. I didn't do that one. Wasn't there. But anytime a company, for its own purposes, doesn't realize whatever the cost, it should actually make the product right, so its own reputation continues, that's a concern. And as a military person who got to see a lot of contracting in Iraq, thank you very much, I'm a little bit nervous about outsourcing all of our jobs to contractors. That said, I think that ODOT has a very good reputation working with contractors for specific projects. I actually believe that the board that oversees ODOT, because it is a special government in terms of it has legislative oversight and also its own board for direction, I think they do a pretty decent job about making sure that the jobs that can be let to the private sector are, but there's overseers and making sure that the public's stewards' priorities are done the correct way is also a priority. So I think the balance is fine. If anything, I think we need more infrastructure, not less, more roads and bridges, not less. And I don't believe that we should just start outsourcing for the sake of outsourcing.
I sure do have a rebuttal. So I'm a commercial real estate appraiser, have been for several years. My husband and I own an office that does contract on occasion with ODOT, and I can tell you it isn't a lean and mean budget over there. ODOT makes all their own rules. ODOT chooses who to bid for contracts and who not to bid for contracts, and I would be delighted to sit down with them and cut it down to a lean and mean budget.
Paul, this one's for you. Under the current PERS agreement, the employee makes no contribution to their retirement. If elected, would you propose or support a bill to change PERS for all new hires, where the state would match up to the maximum of 5% of what the employee contributes into a 401 retirement?
When it comes to PERS, first of all, for me, off the table is any cuts to folks that have already entered into a contract, because I believe contracts are important. Having said that, with future new employees, I'm open to looking at how we can make sure that we can have a sustainable government over time. I know going in, I'm actually a tier 3 person. So I recognize that we need to make sure that there's going to be a system in place so that public servants are treated well, have a good retirement, and that everybody can recognize as a fair retirement. So I'm open to that for new hires. I'm absolutely not open to it for folks that have already been contracted. And for me, that's a special case, because as a mayor, I actually sat across the table and negotiated contracts, and I gave my word. We couldn't pay the salary that other towns could. We couldn't necessarily meet some of the other objectives, but we promised them good health care and a good retirement. And I think that's fair when people give their careers to serving the public. We have to make sure not to make our budget cuts off the backs of public servants. They're doing an important job. Having said that, we live in a new economy, and we need to sit down and reason together in a collaborative way to find how we can make a government that is sustainable to meet the needs of our society.
So I certainly believe in contract law. I operate my business on that basis, and most of the country does. We cannot go back on contracts. But yes, we can repair and change from this point on. One thing I want to add, anyone that noticed the news article this week, I was just shocked. I've been waiting all this time to see what the court system was going to do with the decisions made on PERS during the short session. And what came out in the paper? Surprise! What we changed wasn't in the contract at all. I'm tired of that happening. We need better oversight.
I'm actually still waiting for the final decision out of the courts.
All right, and Paul, do you view our current lack of border control as immigration or invasion?
Well, as a person who's actually taken part in the invasion, it didn't look like what we currently are looking at the border. In the last 8 years, and I could be wrong on this number, but I believe the number of border agents has trebled, if not quadrupled. We've built fences where I didn't know fences could be built. And if I'm not mistaken, Texas has asked for the National Guard to be on alert against a possible invasion from Mexico, which Texas probably should do that for lots of other reasons. When it comes to border security, there's no one actually in this race that spent more of my life or more of their life trying to defend this country. I think that we have to be careful with what we call the issue. I don't think it's an invasion. I think it is a policy that has lingered for too long, because the dirty little secret is that partisans on the left and the right both want it to continue just as is, because some businesses are making benefit from it, and as long as enforcement isn't too much, more people are coming across. At some point, the rhetoric has to stop. Big boys and big girls have to sit across from the table and actually figure out how we're going to deal with 11 million people that happen to be in the country, and how we're going to deal with the folks that want to come here. Again, they want to come here because they actually have a work ethic and want to do things. And I'll tell you, as a person who teaches in public schools, it's hard for me to get upset at people wanting to come to Oregon that actually have a work ethic. because I'm not seeing that in the class every day. And it's really hard for me to understand how some political refugees from countries that no longer are relevant get in when folks want to come here and actually add to the economy and do something for their families don't have that same right. I'm not saying it's legal, it isn't. We need to fix the problem, but we need to do it, I think, with a heart and a mind, not just response to rhetoric.
So, immigration isn't a District 20 problem. And it's not something that District 20 is going to be able to solve. It's another example of federal government failure by not having an immigration policy, not coming together, not enforcing the laws that do exist. So I would be looking at the federal government. Let's get our feet on the ground and let's get this straightened out. It's not for me to do. I have ideas, but I also think those that are saddled with that problem need to be the ones standing up and addressing it.
Here's my concern on that. I actually think it's naive not to recognize that the immigration issue has an impact on the people in House 20. It does. When 63% of the public schools in Central School District are on public support, and many of those folks happen to not be documented, when we have a lot of workers that are undocumented, when we have wineries and other companies around the state that are concerned because their workforce happens to be largely undocumented and they don't know what they're going to do if we don't fix it. Oregon isn't responsible, but we're involved. And we need to be invested in trying to work with the federal government to find a reasonable, rational, sustainable solution.
Okay, and the next question goes to you, Paul. I'm sorry, for Kat. I'm sorry, I'll get this straight. What is your stance on the use of drones and the individual's right to privacy as stated in the Fourth Amendment?
The problem is that we as a country have to decide just exactly where that line of privacy and invasion of privacy is. And there's lots of people working on it. I actually support the use of drones. Rest assured, I'll probably disagree when I look out my window some morning as I'm getting up and getting dressed and there's a drone going by. I may argue on the other side of that. But I do believe, again, we need to draw a line in the sand. We need to write policy that helps us on that. So all people that use drones, have drones, drones in war situations, and drones in our homeland. We need to determine that.
I know you had something on that.
Yeah, I actually, when it comes to matters of privacy, I am far more libertarian across the board on all matters of privacy. I fought lots of places, 10 different contingencies, 4.5 years in combat zones to make sure that I have a right to not have to worry about some stupid model airplane flying by my window. Especially when we use those types of model airplanes to hunt down terrorists and kill them. Now, as a legislator, will I absolutely do my best to try to find a reasonable balance between the needs of privacy and the needs of law enforcement under certain circumstances when there are warrants? Yes. Will I try to help make sure that state policies are in line with what FAA evolves with? Yes. But I do not agree with the idea or the vision where millions and millions of little UAVs will be flying all over the streets. That's not why I live in Oregon. I live in Oregon to get away from some of those technology things and to get away from some of the people and those pressures. So I'm not a big fan of drones here in the U.S., and I'm very rigid about privacy issues.
I sure do. So, again, it's a question that involves far more than District 20, far more than the state of Oregon. It requires large policy from our federal government that determines what is invasion of privacy and what is not. And that's how we have a court system set up, the Supreme Court. They will decide if there's policy that's laid down, if it's legal or not. And it's not up to a little legislature in Salem, Oregon to determine what is or what is not. That's not part of the job. We're going to have our plates filled with many more things that connect directly to District 20 than drone flying.
Rebuttal. 10th Amendment Constitution suggests that police powers are reserved to the states. I think I read that. In these issues, it has a lot to do with Oregon's perspective and how our courts determine privacy for our state. In other political issues, people talk about using the courts and not the courts around privacy issues. I see no difference when it comes to privacy. In the legislature, you do have a role. Is it the primary role? Probably not. But it is part of the process of serving in the legislature. These issues will come before us, and you need to know where we stand.
Kathy?
Yes.
What will you do to enforce the state constitution to ensure non-citizens do not vote in any election?
I'm fully behind requiring citizenship to vote and proof of citizenship when you vote. And how that's going to be done, there's various ways. But that's only reasonable. We don't want non-citizens voting, and we want to stand true on that.
Yeah. When it comes to this particular issue, we have vote by mail in the state, and there are processes in place to make sure the signatures are checked and that citizenship is assured. More to the point, though, if there are cases of abuse, I want a rigorous investigation, and I want to make sure that we set aside funds to the Secretary of State and the county clerk, which actually manage the election, with the right resources to make sure that there's third-party observation to make sure that it's fair. The vote is the most precious asset any citizen of this country has. To let it go or to ignore where there might be problems is foolhardy.
I think that we have problems, frankly, in some of our voter policies, and frankly, vote by mail has some problems. I don't know that I'm strongly for that. I personally would like to go back to the polls, and I'd certainly like to line up the polls with my citizens' identification right there. That's the way I think that we need to stop it.
Okay, Kathy, I'm sorry, Paul, this comes to you.
Uh-huh.
It has been established that individuals are being electronically tracked by government agencies and commercial entities. Do you believe these activities threaten privacy and civil liberties?
Yes, but I absolutely believe that government, knowing how effective he, NSA is, that I'm far more concerned about Amazon, Facebook, and the privates knowing where I'm doing and what color socks I'm buying and everything else. So I'm absolutely concerned about privacy from the public and the private interests, and we need to get smarter about that, both at the state level and the federal level.
I have to think about that a little bit, but we should not throw out all use of those devices, frankly. There's going to be a big discussion in Oregon about our police going into parking lots now, and they can instantly determine if there's a warrant out for a stolen car or someone there. There's pluses and there's minuses. I think Oregon has gone so far in the direction of being absolutely squeaky clean and careful about everything that pretty soon it inhibits business, it inhibits people, and I think we have to be a little common sense and practical about it too.
I think that the more squeaky clean when it comes to privacy, the better. I think that as a person who spent most of my adult life defending this country, I love my country. I'm weary sometimes about my government.
And Paul, this one, sorry, this one's to you. Capital punishment is an Oregon law. The governor stated that while he is in office, capital punishment will not be enforced. What is your position on selective enforcement of Oregon laws?
I'm sick and tired of it. I can answer that decisively and quickly. I don't see how the governor has a right to determine which policy, which law he'll enforce and which ones he won't. We have a national president doing that very same thing. We have Holder doing the same thing himself. And when a law is passed through Congress, then darn it, it's to be enforced. We did not elect those people to decide whether it's good or bad. If they can't enforce it, then they got to give up the job. And I can see, I put Governor Kitzhaber in that same group, frankly.
Paul?
All right, here's the deal. I am for the death penalty, especially when it involves police and symbols of the government. I don't agree with the governor's stand on this particular issue. That said, I absolutely believe he is well within his rights and his powers to do so, and here's why. Executive privilege is not an invention of the Obama administration, nor is it an invention of the Kitzhaber administration. I seem to remember going back to old Thomas Jefferson when he bought the Louisiana Purchase without telling Congress about it, that executive privilege seems to be one of those things that occurs. The question is, does that policy reflect either the will of the public or the best interest of the public? I'm hoping, if elected, to have conversations with the governor about not just what is currently part of the capital punishment protocols, but really crime and punishment in general. What are the incentives and non-incentives we currently have in this state? It is my opinion. I recognize that not everybody agrees with that. But I don't question the 3 different branches of government that was established by our founders that has some wisdom in it. If the legislature doesn't want it bad enough, they can actually overturn executive policy through law. But that hasn't occurred.
For some reason, piffle comes into my mind. Just plain piffle. Sorry. I'm tired of elected officials overreaching their jobs. I don't think we elected the governor to not enforce or to intercede on the enforcement of laws that we passed. And I'll let it stand at that.
Paul, this one comes to you.
Yes, sir.
Would you support bringing in a third party, unaffiliated representatives to negotiate with the state employees union instead of allowing the state to fill that role?
Well, I know that there are some union leaders that wish that would have happened in the last round because of some changes that occurred that they didn't plan on. I'm a believer that the more transparency, the better. I think that the folks that are members of public unions are members of public unions like anybody is a member of a union, because there are pressures on employees that are workers, and there's pressures on management, and there's a natural friction that occurs. So I'm always concerned when they're separated out as public unions or private unions or the unions. Having said that, if both parties want a third party involved, and I think both would be open to that, I've got no problem with the people and the people's interest being served by yet another perspective in terms of observation. Everything that happens in those meetings gets made public anyway because it's a public business. So if it's seen that that's helpful by both parties, then yes. I don't have any experience in terms of the macro level for negotiating with the large union, so I don't know that a third party is needed. But if both parties think it's a good idea, I'd support it.
I think the problem has to be straightened out before you get to direct negotiations. The problem seems to me to be occurring on collective bargaining and what the parameters will be on collective bargaining, and what fits into that and what does not fit into that. And I would honestly accept a third party, but we have to give that third party sidebars, rules for what can come into collective bargaining and what's inappropriate.
I think laws are passed to determine what is appropriate and isn't appropriate in collective bargaining, and that's one of the reasons that we get chances to elect legislators.
Kathy, this one I'll start with you. Under current policy, after forest fires, trees burned in the state forests are not allowed to be logged. Would you support changing the policy and allow burned areas to be logged within 6 months of the fire and replace the logged trees with several different sizes and varieties of trees?
So I would. So I think we have in Oregon done an absolutely wonderful job in replanting areas. All you have to do is drive to the Tillamook Burn area, and it's gorgeous. And we didn't spend the time looking for various size, shape trees or anything else. It was following the law to replant trees as soon as they were removed. I have real concerns, frankly, about the way the federal government supervises and manages their forest. I think state forests that are managed by our people in this state are far more productive.
Well, as a candidate who's not received any checks from major lumber firms, this will actually come as a surprise. But my first job when I got out of the Air Force was pulling green chain.
I can't hear. I'm sorry.
Many of my family still actually work in the forest industry. And I actually believe in an aggressive harvest approach. The issue has to do with making sure that we have sustainability of species, sustainability of our lands, but there's a lot of lessons that can be learned from actually the private landowners and how they have policies. If elected, I look forward to working on the natural resources agenda to try to find a better balance.
Can you pull your mic a little closer to you and that make me further here?
I can.
Thank you. Okay.
Can you hear now?
Bad what?
Can you hear now? My dad's an audiologist, he can help.
All right, remember the rules, folks.
Certainly, that's me. Always the rules. I'm a rule follower. In any event, I have not changed my opinion on that a bit. We have forest lands in our family. I've sold forest lands. I've watched forest lands. I've watched federal forest lands burn down. No, I don't think the federal government properly manages their forest at all, and I've yet to hear from a single person that lives near a federal forest that thinks it's been properly managed.
No.
Well then, Paul, this one's for you.
All right.
Under the current labor agreement, the state pays 100% of the state's employees' medical insurance premiums. Would you propose or support a bill that would require all hires, new hires, to pay 1/3 of their own medical insurance premiums?
Well, I'm a little confused because that isn't the deal I got. I'm a public employee.
Okay.
So I actually have to respectfully suggest that the premise is a little bit untrue. Having said that, I think, again, through open collaboration and discussion, public employees, like everybody, have a stake in making sure Oregon is sustainable. I think that there are reasonable ways in which we can find a way so that everybody has, as Kathy would say, skin in the game. I know in my public employee situation, I do. I have to pay money to be a part of the health thing, which is interesting because I actually go to the VA, but I still pay because I want to make sure that public employees have that opportunity.
Well, I certainly don't expect people to pay more than they need to if you're telling me that you pay what you want to on top of what the VA is paying. I find that hard to believe, but maybe that's because I'm a business person. I don't pay more for product than anybody asks. That's a little far out. I think absolutely that public employees need to pay a portion of their health insurance. That's what happens. Most of the people sitting in this room that aren't public employees pay more than a portion. And fair is fair.
Ruba, actually, as a law follower, you should probably know this. The state requires me now to actually take the insurance, even though I don't use it. So I'm happy to pay because I actually am happy that I live in a country where I have the opportunities that I've been given. But it isn't like a choice, and actually experiencing government has taught me that.
So I hope you all realize that I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not intending to be a lawyer, and I'm a little tired of being corrected that everything I say is not so. I've done quite well.
Okay, Kathy, this one is for you.
Good.
What is your stand on the driver's cards for persons who cannot prove legal presence in the United States, and why?
I'm against it, and a recent poll I read said the state of Oregon, most of the people in the state of Oregon are also against it.
Well, I'm actually for it, and here's why. It's a national security issue. It's a national security issue because the law enforcement community of Oregon has said it's a national security issue, and I happen to believe them. It's also an economic issue. The Nurseries Association and others are concerned as well as the wine industry and others, that if there's not this card, workers will not be showing up and our economy will be in trouble. Now, is it a perfect solution? No. Am I happy about it? Not at all. In fact, I worked for Governor Kulingoski when the Real ID process came down the pike. It is a symptom of our national inability to find a collaborative, sustainable solution on immigration. It is a byproduct of us not coming to consensus. But in the short term, I'm not willing to sacrifice the economy that right now is barely getting along by trying to enforce people, and again, enforce people from having a driver's card, which can't be used for ID, it can't be used for anything else. The language of the bill is very clear. It's only used to prove driving ability and for insurance purposes, to buy insurance. It's not legal standing, it's not status, it's not related to anything associated with Real ID. It can't be. It would be breaking federal law.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So you don't solve a federal fault of not getting the immigration problem solved by giving a driver's license to people that do not live in this country. And I believe strongly in that. The way it was written is not a very good law, in my opinion. It was not working, and if you spend time talking to law enforcement officials, they will tell you that you can get a binder on the car and get your license, and that ends that. The insurance goes away. So what has that solved for us? It has not made our roads safer. We've really given a privilege by government to an illegal entrant in this country, and we haven't solved anything. No one's safer.
Thank you. Paul, we'll start with you on this one. Would you support a measure limiting the use of federal and state gas taxes collected by Oregon to be limited to construction and repair of roads for motorized vehicles only? Otherwise, not building bike lanes and all that, but for actually the roads themselves.
That's a tough question for me because actually, originally part of that was designed for state police. So, I'm not a bicycle guy. Look at me. I'm not a bicycle guy. Right? Having said that, I don't know the intricacies because we have nickel and dimed that particular fund to the point that I don't want to give an inaccurate response. What I can give you is a philosophy perspective. In philosophy, I actually like having gas and all, quite frankly, as we evolve and have different taxes associated with transportation, I like most of that money going into infrastructure and transportation. But I know that because the state police was gutted so badly that some folks are looking at getting back to dedicated resources. So this is one of those situations where, in theory, I want it spent that way. I don't know enough about the particulars going into the 15th session on that, about how best to leverage those resources. What I will tell you is I will not be the guy that suggests we use gas and other fuel tax on creating new schools or other things like that. I mean, I think you try to keep the revenue stream associated with the outcome for that policy, and that's generally a pretty good rule. And that used to be why state police spent most of their time on the highways and freeways. That was kind of how they justified it. So that's a sticky issue. I don't want to give the wrong impression. In general, yes.
It seems to me that the group that's running this state at this time has a lot of things that they don't want to get into the details of. It seems they don't have enough money again. And, well, maybe it's been misspent someplace. Well, there's just question after question. And it's getting a little old. We're still paying our taxes, and we're still paying for our road taxes. And frankly, I think we'd ought to make them work. I'm not much interested in paying more to have my streets taken care of at this point.
How long do I have for rebuttal?
1 minute.
This reminds me of the frog and the scientist. The frog decides to figure out how the scientist decides to figure out how the frog hears and whether it can jump or not. It measures how far the frog can jump. When it has 4 legs, it jumps so far. He starts whittling away to where the frog has no legs and it can't move, and then it blames the frog for being deaf. We've made a lot of decisions in the government because of Measure 5, Measure 47, 50, We have no, or at least very few, police folks patrolling Polk County now because of the pressures of that. And again, I haven't been in the legislature. I worked for the governor at the legislature, but I haven't served. I hope to try to bring some common sense to the legislature, but I'm not going to try to defend decisions that they've made in terms of tax policy. What I will tell you is we need to make some tough decisions, or we're not going to have an Oregon to worry about.
Kathy, this is for you. The Oregon legislature was founded as a part-time citizen legislature. Do you see your responsibility as a state representative as that of creating new laws or possibly reducing the number of them and holding the enforcers accountable for existing laws?
So I very much see that new laws should be weighed on the scale of whether they promote development and job growth or whether they don't, whether they inhibit job growth. What the state of Oregon needs right now is more jobs, and that solves a lot of problems we fiddled around with. If we have more jobs, those will get solved. And as far as going backwards, I think we need to learn to sunset some of these bills that are in effect right now. We don't tend to do that very often. I think that would be helpful.
We found agreement. I actually believe that every bill should have a sunset clause. Because the sunset clause, and this has actually been on something I've been talking about for the last 3 years, sunset clause forces a discussion to see if the bill is even accomplishing anything anymore or if the bureaucracy is on track. We have to get in the idea that legislators aren't valued by the number of bills and the number of pages in a bill to get passed. We have to get past that being the litmus test of progress or not progress. Sometimes the best decision is actually to pull back. Sometimes it's best to move forward. But if we don't have the sunset clause, what we end up with are policies that continue to move on that often have nothing at all to do with what they originally started for. For example, at the congressional level, the U.S. Congress, I believe it was in 1990 something that they stopped trying to find World War I veterans to give medals to. There weren't that many at that point, and it continued because no one asked the question. And the sunset clause requires the question to be asked.
No.
Well, and Paul, this one's for you. Would you support or propose modifying vote by mail by requiring ballots to be deposited at the precinct on election day with voter signature verified using the Oregon issued photo ID, and the ballots would still be mailed out to the houses 20 days prior?
Here's the deal. I actually am not enamored by vote by mail either. I still remember the purple thumbs in Iraq. Having said that, the people have spoken, and people that in the past would have had a harder time getting to the polls now have opportunities that they didn't have. And I don't have to worry generally about going to bed at night like people in Ohio and Florida do, wondering if their votes got cast. So I'm not going to propose a change to vote by mail. What I would be open to is making sure that penalties for using the voting systems may be increased. What I'm also open on is we want more observation and when the votes are counted, I'm open for that. But I think the ability of people who in other forms and other situations wouldn't have the chance to get to a polling place, I don't want to get in the way of that. It's too important.
Well, we had that for a long time, and people did get to the polling places. That's why we have them in neighborhoods that people can get to. I think I would really be in favor of relooking at vote by mail. I'm not thinking that that's always fair and good.
If I could, I started, didn't I?
Yes.
Is that?
Are you finished? Are you finished? Okay.
I'm just saying that I actually was elected under that old system too. I remember that. But sometimes we evolve. Sometimes we learn lessons that we didn't think about before. And we have a lot of people that right now have mobility that didn't have the same mobility before. And I think right now, compared to other states, Oregon is seen as a leader in making sure that we know who is voting and when. That's all.
Kathy, this next question is for you, and it's a follow-on for this one. It is, as a state representative, would you encourage our federal senators and congressmen to push or propose a bill that no voting results were issued until the last poll in the United States was closed?
I think we did that once, and it just never quite worked out that way on the West Coast. It seemed to slip out or something, and it happened. So I don't know that it's an issue for me, quite frankly.
I'm for it if I get to go to Hawaii and be part of the last votes counted. I have no dog in that fight.
You have a rebuttal?
No.
Okay. Then this one's for you, Captain. Would you support or propose a bill that would allow the public and private sector union members to decide if they want to make a political donation, and if so, to which candidate and which cause?
Read it one more time.
In other words, would you support a bill saying every member of the union can decide where their portion of the political donation, who gets it or what cause gets it, not the union itself?
I would be for that, but I think it can probably be solved easier than that, than having each one make their own decision. They can write a check like everybody else. That's what I would like to see members do, and not see members participate in union voting.
I'm trying to understand what was just said.
Okay. The unions take part of your dues and put it into a political fund, and the union, basically the people running the union decide what the money goes to. We're trying to see if you would support where that money, the individual would decide where that money goes.
In her answer, I'm trying to understand.
Okay, I'm sorry.
You're saying that people write checks separate from that process completely, that it doesn't exist?
If they want to make a donation, they can donate like all the rest of us and write a check.
But the question was, the union takes your money and gives it to whoever the union leaders feel is right. Do you agree with that?
I realize that, but maybe the union should cut their budget back so the union is not making political donations. The dues would not be as high as they are, and those individuals are free to write a check if they choose.
I'm not for any changes. I think the unions actually represent what the members want, and there's a system called fair share that if people don't want to be part of the union, they don't have to be. So I don't think that there needs to be a change on that.
I do. I absolutely do.
Paul, would you support or propose a bill to do away with the state employment agency and turn it over to private sources?
No. No, there's some things that private couldn't do that the employment department is required to do by Department of Labor. So this is one of those premise questions that we can look to potentially privatize certain functions, but oversight of, for example, the Fair Trade Act and others have to be done. Veterans policies, for example, leave ops and DEVers both have to be public employees to be able to do that function by federal law, DOL. So I don't know that that can be done. Am I open to more innovative ways to help the employment department meet the needs of the 21st century? Yes. Am I for turning it wholesale over the private sector? I don't think legally that can be done. So no, I'm not for that.
The way that's written, I probably wouldn't favor it either. However, I certainly would favor reducing the red tape and the paperwork that needs to be done on that basis, and I would like to see the employment department reduced in size considerably.
The employment department right now isn't that large. They leverage personnel, but the point is it needs to be more innovative. The governor actually has instituted some strategies. I'm familiar with some of the strategies they're putting in place right now, especially having to do with linking up workforce preparation to the certificate of workforce readiness. And I think that that's along the right line. It's actually working with industry to find the skills necessary to get workers there. So I don't want to get in the way of that. So again, I'm open to the discussion, but I want to make sure we're clear about the federal requirements and how we have oversight over those. In many ways, federal dollars pushed to the state to make sure that we're meeting the needs of industry.
Kathy, I just want to start with you. Would you change the unemployment agency's policy of you can file weekly on the computer instead of having to show up in there at the office to get your check mailed to you?
I'd change it more than that. I think that's a gimmick that's been there for years, and I would like to find a way to verify that people on unemployment actually were looking for unemployment rather than just putting in a name of a company or an employer that may or may not even exist.
We are now in the 21st century. Computers and technology are the way in which more than just checking in and checking out are done. It's also a way of accounting. There's a way to make sure that companies contacted actually have been contacted. If we're concerned about abuse of the system, I'm all about looking into ways to make it harder to abuse the system, because I don't think anybody should get a free ride. On the other hand, we went to that system to try to make it more available, and oh, by the way, lest I say the words, so we would have fewer employees actually on the job. We have disinvested employees to try to, in technology taking the place of those jobs. So if we did that, we'd be hiring more public workers. So I think the computer system and the technology systems are in place because they reflect current times and the needs that we have.
I don't think so. Simply that. I believe in the 21st century. I work on a computer every day. That's not the point. I don't think that it's being checked. It never has been checked, and I have never met a single soul in the business world that's ever been asked if somebody came in and asked for a job.
All right, Paul. What is your stand on concealed carry by law-abiding citizens?
About 6'3.5". No, actually, because I kind of figured this would be one of those issues, I actually have a copy, and we're going to distribute that. I have a copy of, and it's right here, my concealed handgun license. So I'm for them. I have one. Not carrying tonight because I figured it might be scary in a library, but I have one. I think that the right to bear arms is one of those important things as a gun owner. I also believe that responsibility is key to keeping that right. And the bottom line is that I am very comfortable that the sheriffs have control over that because I think it's at the right, appropriate local level where they know people. And at the end of the day, I would fight very hard to make sure people have that right. In fact, I did.
Well, I have heard something about heavily taxing ammunition to limit the purchase of guns. I've read it several times. And as far as bringing your permit to this meeting, I happen to have one too. I just don't celebrate showing it off to everyone. I think that's a little beyond.
I don't want to see the show off. What I will do, though, is we also have another document that actually is referencing the point that Ms. Goss just made. I did actually talk about taxing bullets for two reasons. The first is that when you actually tax bullets, because government is government, you know guns will never go away because it actually creates a revenue stream. We also know that if we tax bullets that are the most lethal in terms of the bullets that can actually go through a police vest, that if there's a way to use the market, which Republicans should like, there's a way to use the market to actually make bullets on the field less lethal, that seems to me something that should be considered. I've never said taxing bullets to outlaw guns. In fact, the Second Amendment, I think, is very clear in our right to own guns. The question might be what types of guns we should own, because people as liberal as Stanley McChrystal and other generals have said perhaps everybody doesn't need to have a howitzer at their house.
Okay, Kathy, Would you support drug testing for welfare recipients?
I would support drug testing for welfare recipients and for a lot of other employees, particularly just drug testing every welfare recipient without cause, I don't think is appealing at all.
I do if we include corporate welfare. For those companies that are currently receiving tax, shall we say, incentives, that are subsidies, I'm absolutely for it as long as the corporations that are supposedly people too have to submit to the same tests.
I can't figure out what anybody's laughing about yet. Maybe I just didn't hear it. But yes, corporations are people, or can speak as people. And sorry, that's the way the law is.
I own two.
Paul, this one's for you to start. If the state position is left open or unfilled for 90 days, would you support removing that position from the agency's table of organization and recovering and eliminating the funding for that position?
It depends on who wins the selection. So, maybe. I think that when you get into cutting positions based on a time schedule or some formulary like that, you risk perhaps cutting law enforcement and others that currently are underfunded. Here's what I mean by that. The state police right now have not been 24/7 for the last X number of years. And if they were under that policy, I would not be for cutting something that they can't fill because they can't get someone to take the wages. So I think arbitrary approaches like that are dangerous. However, should we have a conversation about making sure that agencies don't just invent jobs so they can cut them back and play with money? Yeah, I'm open to that. I've seen that as well. But I think we have to be careful about programmatic change that sounds good, but may have some unanticipated consequences.
So we've all seen that. It's a common practice. It exists in all state agencies. And frankly, that's been going on for the last 30 years that the Democrats have been in charge. It's the way it is. It's the way they get extra money. Sorry.
No.
Good.
Kathy, we'll start with you on this one. Would you support or propose a bill to limit welfare to 4 years in a lifetime?
I haven't heard of that one before, and quite frankly, I don't like the last 3 words in that, in a lifetime. That seems not to address the facts. I would be more interested in limiting it to 4 years at any time, consecutively. I mean, people do have second accidents, or people do have a reoccurrent problem. And I think that's a silly idea. I think that we need to monitor things and make sure it's wisely put there. But to put an arbitrary number for a lifetime seems pretty silly to me.
I would not be for that, but I also want to make the point that welfare isn't one program. It's actually 100+ programs, and many of them actually have timelines attached. And again, I think in 1996, when Clinton and the Republican Congress came to some changes with welfare as we know it, there were some timelines and work requirements put in. States have certain flexibilities. I think that if we are concerned about abuse of it, we can do it in a thoughtful, collaborative way. But a 3 or 4 year arbitrary timeline associated with life, especially with people living longer, I don't think is a smart plan.
Well, I would rebut, but I received my instructions over there on how it's been in the past, and I still stand just the same way. It isn't appropriate.
All right, Paul, we'll start with you on this one. Public employees' benefits have strained the budget of many states, counties, cities, schools, even in Oregon. Some governors have urged controversial measures to bring these expenses further under control. What stance would you advocate in Oregon?
To what specific aspect of that?
On the public employees' benefits.
Well,
I think this question is kind of like what happened in Wisconsin.
okay. We have cut public benefits. First of all, the PERS thing that people are talking about actually did have an impact. We have, in many cases, stalled wages. I know as a public employee, I actually had furloughs for a while. I mean, I'm concerned about a particular programmatic approach that's that widespread. Again, one of the things I'm running for is that I think it's time we actually have a conversation, not about how government has functioned, the good and the bad and the ugly, but more importantly, what we want government to do now. There are certain functions that government probably shouldn't be doing. There are certain functions government isn't doing very well, and there are certain functions government does extremely well. I think what we need to figure out before we start figuring out how many people we're going to have in government, we figure out what are the major functions the government should be doing, how the government can actually help create an economy. We don't make jobs, we can help sustain an environment that helps private sector create jobs, how we can build schools and education in a way that focuses on the student, how we can make sure that we have infrastructure to support business, how we can compete in the 21st century, and then we can figure out how many employees we need and what's the smartest way to sustain a vibrant and fairly balanced public safety or public servant workforce. I've seen different states do different things. None of them have our tax structure. None of them have our history. So I don't know how to answer that question.
Ted, would you read it again?
Public employee benefits have strained the budgets. The public employee benefits have strained the budget of many states, counties, cities, and schools, even in Oregon. Some governors have urged controversial measures to bring these expenses further under control. What stance would you advocate in Oregon? And I think a lot of that was pointed towards the Wisconsin resolution, or how they resolved it.
So quite frankly, I found that interesting that public employee benefits have strained budgets even in Oregon. And I think to be a truthful statement, that needs to stay especially in Oregon. We have a very, very gold-plated employee benefit plan for state employees.
I didn't get my gold.
Okay, Kathy. What is your position on allowing Sharia law to be enacted in Oregon?
I assume this is the end of the questions. That has to be the last topper.
No. These are questions people have written into us.
Oh, absolutely not. I think everyone but our president agrees that Sharia law isn't appropriate in this country.
Come on, guys, you know the rules, please. Paul?
I'm comfortable with our current legal process. I don't think we need to change it for that.
Rebut.
No.
Okay, Paul, this one's for you. Do you support or oppose Common Core, and why?
Well, at the risk of explaining again, Common Core, passed by 40 governors, was not the president's plan. His plan was raised to the top. Common Core, in many ways, reflects a lot of data and information that have been used for a long time. Having said that, I put Common Core in the same category as Raised to the Top, as in the same category as No Child Left Behind. It's a boilerplate to support a federal program that emphasizes particular types of testing, and I'm concerned that we have so focused on that we've forgotten the basics about education. Here's what I mean by that. We've forgotten about contact time between students and teachers. We've forgotten about community involvement in the schools. We've forgotten and made it actually harder for volunteers to be in the schools. We've forgotten that at the end of the day, we should have voc ed as a part of the program, because it's not just for at-risk kids, it's actually a way some kids learn. We have to get class sizes smaller, we have to be smarter about what we're teaching, And is Common Core a part of that? Probably, but we should also make sure that science, that technical training, that music, that art, that those things that actually can sustain a society are part of it. And my overarching philosophy is this. Common Core aside, we have to make sure that we're actually training citizens at least as well as we're training workers. And we have forgotten civics in the schools for too long. So I'm not a supporter of Common Core, I'm not its enemy. I don't care about it. I'm focused more on getting class sizes better and teachers the tools to actually succeed. I see Common Core as a testing strategy that will probably be kicked down the curb a couple more times and adjusted, because it's rearranging the deck chairs on a ship that isn't moving anywhere. We have to focus local government, local school districts. We have to reshift how we provide the local communities the ability to tailor the education for the jobs in their environment, and we have to make it public education a priority again, not just in dollars, but in personal investment. If we're not involved in the schools and we're not making our public schools better, we're not going to make our society better. This is one of the primary reasons I'm running for this office.
Yeah.
So, I don't like Common Core. I won't vote for Common Core, and I won't support it. I heard Paul say it was made up by and voted in by a gathering of governors. Well, governors aren't educators, number one. We want local control for our students. We want parents that live here, that know what our values and our feelings are. Now, I'm not against a nationwide standard that says across our nation we'll be reading by the 3rd grade. That's a standard. Common Core has turned out to be a complete methodology. I know education, I have a doctorate in education, and Common Core is not the way to go. Local control with local parents. We know best what to do with our kids. I don't trust government to come up with that. I trust each of you that has a family, a child. That's what we want in Oregon.
Mostly, I agree, but there's some factors that make it a little different than it used to be. And again, it's going back to the way life is now. More parents are having smaller families than ever before. People are living longer, and people with means are disinvesting in the public schools and taking their kids to private schools, which means we're losing not just the kids, but the parents. We are rapidly approaching a point where the public school is the school of last resort for too many kids. If we're not smart, we're going to end up with a very different society than we thought we should and actually could have. I'm not willing to let that happen on my watch. I don't have a doctorate, but I've spent 20 years teaching. I'm currently in the classroom and I've been on the school board having to make those decisions. One of the reasons I'm running is because I think the state right now isn't on the right track. And as a former school board member, I am very protective of local rights for school boards and school districts and students, but it revolves around making sure that the locals have the opportunity to play to the strengths of the local workforce.
Okay, this is the last question. We went through this a lot faster than we thought we would tonight, so we'll start with you, Kathy. The Statehood Enabling Act promised to return tidal lands controlled by the federal government back to the 50 states. Eastern states were given back their lands from federal control. Oregon is among other western states seeking to transfer public lands back to the states for economic benefits and wise use of natural resources. If you're elected, will you join sponsorship of the legislation demanding transfer of public lands to the state? If not, how would you defend continuing possession of Oregon lands by the federal government?
I absolutely would support taking our public lands and especially our public forests back. We have a huge amount of Oregon land that is now owned, managed by the federal government. The problem is that we don't have any leverage to get that to happen, and we haven't for years. Senator Wyden has a plan that really doesn't do it. Greg Walden had a better plan. When I was a child, lived in Oregon, we were a resource-based economy, and we did well. Families could pay their bills. We all could pay our bills. I look back now and I think we're trapped. We need to do a better job of balancing what environmentalists want and what we need for jobs. That's what we're not doing in this state. The federal government is locking up even larger areas. And I would like to see that change, no question about it. We have wonderful farmland. We have great clean water that not every state has. I would like not to have any of those locked up or owned by the federal government.
I am familiar with this issue. What has not been answered to my satisfaction yet is what role treaties play in that act, because some treaties predate those decisions. Am I in favor of finding a way to be smarter and better and more productive on natural resources? Yes. Do I think we need to find a way to cut more trees? Probably, but I also want to make sure that they're actually, if they're harvested here, that the first level of value added is here as well. I'm also concerned about the approaches that we seem to have in terms of fisheries and the impact. Nothing in forestry should impact that as much as it seems to have in some areas. So to me, the federal government owning it is less of a problem than the management practices that we need to insist upon. And more importantly, the kinds of economies we seek to build around those natural resources. My first job coming out of the Air Force again was pulling green chain. I'm not the guy that's against cutting trees, but I want to make sure that as we cut them, we're cutting them on 80-year cycles, not 40. That we're actually having value added in mills here, not mills across the pond. China is going to be needing more and more resources. I'd like to supply those resources, but I want to do it in a sustainable way so that our grandchildren can still be sustaining those resources. That's my concern. In terms of the answer, I'm not for that bill until I'm absolutely certain that we're not going to create more problems with sovereign lands from the tribes.
So I don't really think that addresses getting the lands back to Oregonians. So we determine all those things. We determine if the market will handle value-added practices or not. I don't think we want to leave it in the government. If we ever have a chance to take it back, that's the first thing to do. Ownership does matter. We have a governor in the state of Oregon now that is not pro-inexpensive energy. And I think that's a good example of what we don't want to continue. I'd like to see LNG come down. I'd like to see coal come through Salem, to the shock of some who will inhale a deep breath. I would like to do that because we aren't saving China, and China will get it someplace else if it isn't from us. We need energy in this state so we can have jobs.
Okay, as I said, we had originally scheduled you 3 minutes at the end to say your piece, but we're going to make it 5 minutes since we have the time. And because we started with Kathy, we will start with Paul this time.
I am Paul Evans. I was born and raised in this district, and I'm the grandson of a dairyman and the son of a guy who's been running a small business for 34 years, and I actually do own 2 small businesses. I teach most of the time, so I can't pay a whole lot of attention to them because they're startups, but nonetheless I do own 2. And although this debate is focused upon the 2 candidates, I think by now you've recognized that this election is actually about you. It's about the choice you want to represent you in House District 20. There's going to be a new representative. Vicki Berger is retiring. It's going to be her or I. And ultimately, it's about the kind of Oregon you want. An Oregon that promotes a living wage and a sustainable economy. An Oregon that recognizes the rights of people to think, to act, and to live without fear of their government. An Oregon that keeps faith with our veterans and military families. Or something different. In the end of the day, our nation, our state, and community is the sum of our parts. I believe that fair play, the rewards of hard work, are supposed to be values from top to bottom. I also believe that unless we're careful, we're going to continue to be a state of haves, have-nots, and used-to-haves. And that's not the America I signed up for. That's not the America I believe is possible. At some point along the line, we became disconnected from each other, And at some point along the line, it became acceptable to have two Americas. An America for the folks that sometimes have to depend on the minimum wage or just a little bit better, that have to worry about health care, that have to worry about trying to get the transit routes right so they can actually get to work. And the America of privilege, that don't have to live by the same rules as everybody else. The America that thinks it's okay to have 40% of the wealth owned by the top 1%. I believe not in wealth redistribution, but I actually believe in guaranteed opportunity. I fought a country, I fought a war to make sure that the Oregon I grew up in, where people actually had a chance, they had reasonable education, they had reasonable expectations of being treated fairly, is still the Oregon that continues in the future. At the end of the day, this really is about you. It's not about a particular policy, it's not about a party, it's not about a perspective. It's about who you want in your corner fighting for you when no one else is looking. I'm a middle-class guy. I don't have that much net worth. Spent most of my time in the military, in and out of the military. I live on Main Street in a house that has 3 mortgages. Working on the 3rd one, but it's going to probably be 2 for a long time. I'm a public school teacher at the community college because I actually believe adults should have the opportunity to have a life. And I want to serve you because I believe this country is worth it, and I believe this state is worth it, and I believe that this district is worth it. Whatever you choose, however you choose, don't give up on what America and what Oregon is supposed to be. There is a difference between interest and commitment. Now, those of you that heard this before, I'll say it again. My grandpa used to say that the difference between interest and commitment can be looked at a ham omelet. The chicken is interested, the hog is committed. We need more people that are committed to this country and committed to making sure that every Oregonian doesn't have success, but every Oregonian has the opportunity to succeed. That's what I'm running for. That's why I asked for your consideration. Thank you.
Okay, folks, please. Kathy, you have 5 minutes to say what you want.
Sure, and I'll start it off by thanking the AFT for giving us this opportunity to get our feelings out in the open, and so you can listen and find out what each one of us is about. There's a clear and obvious difference between the two of us. One side depends on government to solve their needs. This side depends on you. Your choices, your actions, what you've earned the right to do. And that's not to have government come and tell you what's right, what's mandated for you to supply. I would put my education credentials against anyone. So I taught for 21 years off and on in Oregon, and I went from North Salem High School all the way up to my doctorate. And my thesis for my doctorate was on adolescent suicide, pardon me. And I did that because I care. I care about my kids, my grandkids. I care about your kids and your grandkids. It's my responsibility to spend the time to use the education I have. I have lots of education, lots of experience, and lots of common sense. I don't have a lot of puffery. I don't believe in it. What you see is what you get. What I say I'll do, I'll do. And that, to me, is very important, particularly in the political end of things. After I was in education for a number of years, I went to work for the Newport Pacific Corporation. And when I came out of education, I never intended to leave it. I still cared. I cared about troubled kids, severely emotionally disturbed kids, all kids. I taught in court school for a period of time. I like kids that don't necessarily fit. I like to find ways to help them fit, help them be part of our community, feel good about themselves. When I went to Newport Pacific, I did it just to consult for a few months. I loved it. I found out that we need to stop the war on business. Business cares every darn bit as much as educators and the other side of the fence. I care about my employees. Every good business I know cares about their employees. I want them happy where they are. I don't want them to feel they need to leave my employment. I give them the leave they want. I supply their health insurance. I also, in the past, have supplied retirement for them. If you're honestly in business and a good business, you do those things because you know that they are the foundation of your business. They are the reason people come to you for a service, and I believe strongly in that. I also did a lot of things in business as far as adjusting payroll, working with government restrictions, taking care of labor laws that were continually there, OSHA, a whole lot of other restrictions. We need to shrink those restrictions. We need government to be able to get going again. Business. We need business to get going again. We owe our children and our grandchildren that. And we need to be able to provide places for them to work. I want my kids to stay right here. That doesn't always happen. Thank you very much for giving us the chance to speak.
I'd like to thank both Kathy and Paul for coming and giving us a chance to pick on them. Now, how many out there are registered to vote? Raise your hands. How many aren't? If you got your hand up, you better get down there and get it done. Because I don't care how you vote, and please don't leave yet because you're going to get a chance to talk to these candidates. But get up. If you don't vote, you don't have a chance to gripe or don't have the right to gripe. So get out there. And now, because we finished early, we're going to open it up so you can come up and talk to them and they can answer your questions one-on-one, if that's all right with you. So thank you for coming tonight, and register to vote and get out and vote and encourage your neighbors to do the same. Thank you.
Yeah.